everyone. You're here with Michael Rubino with another episode of Mold Talks Docs. Today I have Dr. Lauren Tessier with us. Dr. Tessier, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the time that you're committing today to educate others and empower others to take back control of their health. So welcome.
Thank you so much. And of course, thank you for all that you do. It's been so awesome to see just the Mold Medic take off and explode over the past couple of years. And so it's really nice to have folks within my circle be able to direct them somewhere to get some good quality information. So of course, thank you for everything that you're doing, because you got a lot of projects in the works, and you got a lot of irons in the fire. So it's
yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for recognizing that. And yeah, we're trying to fight the good fight of getting people the right information to take action. As you know, this industry that we're in is so convoluted. And confusing, and people are, trying to get the answers they need. So I wanted to start with, give everybody a brief synopsis of you, who you are, and definitely mention the ISEAI, because obviously I'm a huge supporter of the ISEAI. I love what the ISEAI is doing, what it's about. So I think people who are sensitive to their environment, looking for answers, it's a great resource for them.
Yeah. So to start off, like Mike said, I am Lauren Tessier. I'm a naturopathic physician licensed by the state of Vermont. I'm located in beautiful little Waterbury, Vermont. When I moved here, I was vaguely privy to the fact that there was a flood here in 2011, which just caused so many issues for the folks in and around downtown. And it wasn't until I really saw a few treatment resistant cases, like resistant to the typical naturopathic stuff, that, the idea of mold came up in conversation with one of my clients. And that's really what kind of kicked this all off. So I've had my toe in the mold world for, almost 10 years now. And it's great. It's been wonderful. But, I've learned a lot as I've gone. I went through Shoemaker Certification, and then I became involved in ISEAI, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and have just kind of found my space in all of it. I've managed to amalgamate a few different approaches, and also kind of my own naturopathic approach to mold. And I really work with people depending on kind of what type of mold illness that they're navigating. I think one of the biggest issues right now is people just assume mold illness equals CIRS. And there's so much more to mold illness, and how many different ways to become sick from mold. And I don't mean that to shame people because they don't know, because my gosh, there's so much info. But that's something that I really stand on my soapbox is, if you can figure out how mold is bothering you, then you have your treatment right there laid out for you. So during all of this time, and I've been involved with ISEAI. So for those out there who aren't familiar with ISEAI, I'll just say that it's spelled ISEA, like an ocean, ISEAI. And so that stands for the International Society for Environmentally Acquired Illness. It's a mouthful, but it is a professional member educational nonprofit, meaning we teach doctors how to go in and work with their clients when they have been mold exposed, or PCB exposed from building materials, or all these things. So we really focus on the toxic impact in the environment, whether it's outdoors or inside, and how it really leads to chronic complex illness, from everything from CIRS to things as simple as high blood pressure and atherosclerosis, really, really common stuff. So ISEAI has been absolutely wonderful. I've been with them since 2017, and I've risen through the ranks. Not to say as a statement on power or authority, but more out of dedication to a nonprofit. I think people who've been in a nonprofit get that. When you've been in a few positions, it's because you really care about what you're doing there. So I was a general board member, and then sat as secretary and vice president, and now president. So it's been wonderful. And it's also been a crazy couple of years to be president. It's been a whirlwind. So that's me in a little shell, and that's ISEAI in a shell.
Yeah, thank you for that. Totally can relate. And just to kind of back up a second, thank you for when someone did bring mold to your attention. Thank you for not dismissing them like so many other doctors tend to do, and listening and doing the research. And obviously it opened your eyes to this whole world, right? So would have never happened if you weren't a compassionate person to begin with that listened and decided to look into it.
I'm really thankful for the learning experience that's happened, but if you step back and you really dialogue, I'm sure, with numerous mold physicians, they'll also say that, I've had my own experience, and I can say that I've had my own experience, my family's had their experience, and I've had some pretty, my own personal profound health issues that I believe were related to mold. And I've also seen family members with some really, really profound health issues that unfortunately they never recovered from, that I believe were related to mold. So it's kind of, it's usually when you have the power to be a physician and you have the power to help people, but then when someone in your inner circle really needs help and they're not getting the help they need, which is all too common. I'm just thankful that I had the degree and the license and the wherewithal to, put all that training behind me and move forward. Because and the reason why I want to continue to do that is because there are so many families out there who don't have that capability. Like they don't have the resources or the training. And, I really try in my heart of hearts to be a good, honest, and decent guiding light when it comes to this kind of stuff, because it can be really an overwhelming understatement, an overwhelming, upsetting, traumatic thing to navigate. So yeah, I'm thankful for my own personal experience because it's definitely let me help others.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the physical, emotional, psychological, financial hardship that this all can create is overwhelming, right, to say the least. Let's talk about prevalence, right? So it's very interesting. Every day we seem to learn new information, of what the impacts water damage buildings can have on our health. Been looking at research from Dr. Burdison with inhalational Alzheimer's as an example, right? All of this new emerging, philosophy on how bad this is and how many different ways it can impact us. I think we don't yet know today all the different ways, and I think we'll continue to learn more and more over time. But how prevalent is this? I mean, when you're seeing people and they're coming to you with mysterious illness, what percentage of the time do you suspect they do have a mold issue or water damage problem?
Yeah, I set up my practice in such a way for this reason. I've mold in the title of my practice. It's what I do. So usually when people come to me, it's because of a Google search or they search mold. I mean, you know how it is, right?
Yeah.
The mold's in the name, they're going to come. And so there's not a lot of convincing, but my prevalence is 100%, which is obviously not true of the common population. But when you step back and these stats just as well as I do, 80% of commercial buildings have either a past or current involvement in water damage, and up to 50% of residential homes in some studies. Like that just sets the foundation for how widespread it is. And it's so concerning to the point that even groups that don't really want to recognize mold because potentially the huge paradigm change that comes with it, in the 1990s, the CDC added to their SIDS, their sudden infant death syndrome questionnaire, dampness, standing water, and mold. And the CDC wouldn't include that if there wasn't like a about it, So it's there, it's everywhere. And I don't mean to scare people because there's also a lot of safe homes. There's a lot of great work that can be done. But a lot of it comes out of neglect for the interior building spaces,
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think a lot of the way we're changing our building styles, going after that net zero energy efficiency, we're creating a lot of problems in that process. And I think that, this health epidemic, I think, is actually going to continue to get worse, unfortunately, until we start to come together as a community, start to acknowledge the effects that this has on our civilization, and start to come up with creativity to help, prevent and combat this. it's going to keep getting worse, and it's been getting worse, right? You said you were in this for 10 years. I've been in this for 10 years. More and more people every single day are contacting me. And it's when you see that trajectory going up, most people would say from a business perspective, business is booming, but at what cost, right? I mean,
Right.
when we talk about the civilization at hand, people are getting worse, they're getting sicker. This is costing more and more money. We don't have good protections in place from a government standpoint, from regulation standpoint, insurance standpoint, a construction standpoint. The list goes on and on, right? So without really confronting this as a society and coming together and saying, we need to do something about this. This is affecting, our parents, ourselves, our children. It's going to continue to get worse. So, I think it's really good that we're out here advocating and making this, more and more aware. It's interesting. I saw a statistic the other day, 50% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition. Mm-hmm. That's big. There's 7 billion people actually more than 7 billion people. Let's just call it 3.75 billion people on this planet are not well.
Right.
At least one chronic condition. I don't know how much of that percentage is due to water damage, buildings and environments, but I would estimate probably a large percentage of that, because it's something that people aren't aware of. And as people go to doctors all across the world, they're not getting that information. They have to find a doctor like you that says, hey, check your environment. I have a suspicion. So without people getting the answers they need, without getting the data out there, how can we really determine that it's that big of a problem? We can't. We can only guesstimate. And I think that we need to be more diligent in making sure this is part of the equation. And it just comes with an awareness.
And there's a huge paradigm change that has to come with that. In order to have something studied in these peer-reviewed journals and all this kind of stuff, you need to have a general awareness. The other issue is that a lot of people will say, you need to have a general awareness of the field, that a theoretical scientific question needs to be asked, it needs to be studied. So that's like the first issue. The second issue is that where there's no true diagnosis code for this, there's no true recognition, which means that there's no true insurance coverage. There's no true research that is being done from a statistics perspective. Like, there's so many limitations on access because there's no true diagnosis code from this. The closest thing we have is like fungal sinusitis, which is not even close. Toxicity with aflatoxin ingested, which is not even close. There's just a lack of representation is really causing that limitation. And then the third and final thing that I really think is a problem with the lack of evidence is that, thankfully, we have these rules of what we can and can't subject a human study to. Like, we cannot put someone in a box and put toxins in with them to see what happens. We can only do that, to animals, fortunately and unfortunately, right? And so we don't want to do that to humans. We don't want to hurt humans. So the only data that we end up having in these medical studies for humans are people who have been incidentally exposed, someone who thought enough to track them and try to measure it and document what happened, and then post and, create a study, a retrospective study about it. And so when you bring this data to, all the hospitals around and all these impressive clinics all around the nation, and you say, well, look at this longitudinal cohort study, they go, it's not double blind. What do I care about it? And you're just like, oh my gosh. But meanwhile, if you go into the literature and you pull all the literature on animals, we have tons of stuff for mold and mycotoxins in animals because it impacts our food system. It's something that they're always trying to hedge off at the pass. And so I don't understand, or I have my reasons, and I suspect why we don't accept these studies. But I find it really funny that, we can study vitamin C on a rat, or we can study this new chemotherapeutic agent on a rat, or we can study the toxic effects of benzene on a rat. But nope, as soon as you start doing that with mycotoxins, that research is trash. And you're like, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah,
You can't,
totally.
if that's the case, then you have to throw out all of the foundation on which our medicine stands. Like, you can't pick and choose. And so I'm really hoping that there will be a wave and a push forward with that. But the best that we can do now is when we share the data that we know, we say, hey, look, this is an animal study. And we call at that point that, like, these are also the animals that we study all of our medicine and biochemistry on. So take this for what it's potentially worth.
Sure.
Yeah, because we do a great disservice when we make these big mold claims and then we don't say that it's an animal study. That gets used against us when it really could be used to empower us if we were just completely clear from the get-go.
Well, what's really interesting about what you said is that we don't want to put humans in harm's way, right? By doing studies with mold and mycotoxins. So if you happen to be a naysayer listening to this, our question for you is, if it's not harmful, why can't we do a human study? Right. So I think we know the answer to that. It is harmful, and we don't want that plan to backfire because we don't really want the data and evidence out there. Why I suspect why that is because there's no mold kill pill that you can buy from the pharmaceutical industry at this time.
Right.
And unfortunately, kind of how everything works in America, at least, it's all about the money, right? Always about the money. And until, they can figure out a way to monetize it, it's just not something that they're interested in.
Right.
I listened to a lot of these, arguments, especially like as an expert witness in legal cases. I see these types of documents all the time.
Yeah.
And it's really funny, to me, what they say, because the reality of the situation is they don't have any evidence to support that mold is not a problem.
Yes.
And their whole defense is, well, there's, this evidence isn't perfect.
Yeah.
So therefore mold can't be harmful. Right. But it's like, well, show me evidence that mold isn't harmful. And they have none, right? Because they don't know. Right. So it's a very interesting thing in terms of like where things are. I would argue we have way more evidence supporting at this point that mold and bacteria and water damaged buildings inside of our homes definitely are not something that we would consider healthy. And right. If it were not the case, then the CDC wouldn't recommend removing mold from your home. FEMA wouldn't recommend removing mold from your home, right? The EPA would not recommend removing mold from your home. They don't go so far to say that it's, more problematic than what they're letting on. But of course, they're saying for a reason, if you have it, get rid of it. Right. So they wouldn't say that if they didn't know that it was harmful, I think, at the end of the day. And it's really up to us, the people that, see people struggling every day, to do everything in our power to keep putting the information out there, keep educating people as research continues to develop, sharing that research, because once the demand shifts and people care about it 10 times more than they do now, everyone's going to have to fall in line.
Right. 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 And I mean, there's gonna be a lot of resistance to that. I think anyone who's in this field is very much aware of the problematic resistance and the threatening resistance that exists, with that paradigm change. There's something I wanted to mention in response to that. The one other thing that I wanted to say about the research is there's a couple of great pieces that are antithetical to what we're saying. And they're really well written, meaning that they're written in such a way where it's tricksy language and all this kind of stuff, and the Ouroboros of logic, and they're masterful pieces. I don't agree with that, but they're masterful pieces. And what I found very interesting in digging into them, they make these really huge claims of there is no association with autoimmunity and mold or mold exposure. And in another one, they say something of, there's no incidence of people with systemic candidiasis, a fungal yeast infection, in people who have healthy functioning immune systems. And if you go into the data in the literature, there's a couple of pieces I think came out right around the same time, and they never did a recant to include that data. And even with the autoimmunity piece, I think there was a 95% confidence interval linking numerous antibodies and autoimmune conditions to mold exposure in a longitudinal cohort. And did that ever get brought back in as an addendum? No, you know, so it's so interesting of how forceful the blinders just go on.
Sure.
It's profound. And they must be making a lot of money to write those papers.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about that. What's interesting about all of that, though, is like, when it comes to research and science, and even obviously, clinical studies, right? Um, you can easily neglect to put certain things in there,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And your document, in a sense, could be valid based upon what you're saying, because you're not including the research that would contradict your document. So
Right.
that's what these guys craftily do. It's definitely what they're paid to do, essentially, right? And
Mhm.
if for those that don't know, research costs money. You have to pay for research. You have to pay for the data. You have to pay for somebody to collect that data, interpret that data, and give their opinion. And typically, who's paying for the research is looking for a specific outcome for
Right.
that research. And so, it's very easy to leave certain things out to make sure that the message that your whoever hired you to do this research is looking for is there. I mean, look at cigarettes, right? We talked about, we had doctors smoking cigarettes, ads, doctors smoking cigarettes in ads. Cigarettes are great for you. There's no scientific study that says that cigarettes are bad for you, right? We find out that the cigarette companies were paying for all of the research, all of the studies. They all got debunked many years later, and then we all stopped smoking cigarettes. So that's kind of where we're at with mold, right? I mean, we have all this research that says mold is definitely problematic. Then we have on the other side of the fence, people that don't want mold to be problematic, saying mold really isn't problematic. There's no association. I love the fact they said there's no association between any autoimmunity, because if you ask anybody listening to this right now, and that has an autoimmune condition, if you go into a moldy building, do you feel different? They're going to say yes. Right. So, I mean, the person who wrote that study is either hiding underneath a rock and is not dared to actually look at what's out there, or clearly it was just a hit piece on whoever, wanted to write that to make it that way. So, we'll get some of that, there's going to be opposition that way. It's already been happening for 20, 30 years. It's going to keep happening.
Right.
But I think the alarming amount of evidence that it continues to come out day after day, if somebody really puts it all in one nice, easy to read document that shows that, look, there's no definitive way to study this without putting people in harm's way, but this is what's happening. What if we're using existing medical data, right? So, for example, you do all this testing that really has you come to surmise that this person is exposed to their home. Then we get the data of their home and what's actually being impacted in their home, what they're exposed to in their home, and correlate that way. Is it ironclad? No. But if we have 100,000 or millions of these pieces where you're like, look, this is, how could you ignore that? I think people are going to have no choice but to confront that. So I think the technology today continues to improve to be able to do testing to correlate that data. So I think that, I think the future is pretty closer than we think. And I'm very excited for it, because I'm really tired of watching people suffering. And I'm sure you are too.
Right. And I swear it's going to take, there's a couple of things that it's going to take. And one is going to be the recognizing of it in some way, shape, or form of the disease state itself. And I think where the second turning point is going to be, as you mentioned far earlier, is soon as one small insurance company out there comes up and says, we're actually going to do a legit mold rider, or whatever you want to call it, mold coverage, I foresee people just flocking to it, and out of people who have had these experiences before of mold before, and those people are going to flock to that insurance company, are going to pay a high premium because they know the potential of that coverage. But they're also going to be people who are going to be watching their home like a hawk because of the experiences that they already have. So it's not going to be a huge loss for whatever homeowners insurance company makes that first step. I see a big potential there for benefit, and I really hope that that's going to be the thing that catches the wave, because, there's so many small insurance companies that are popping up now that are actually not even insurance companies on the front. They're more of like a data crunching company. There's a big company out there that they're technically just a statistics company. I won't say their name, and they just happen to do insurance secondary because of all the number crunching that they do. So, it's exciting to see all these small insurance companies pop up out of the, Silicon Valley and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, come on, like someone just needs to get hip to the groove and make it happen, because all the people interested in prevention, I know I would move my homeowner's insurance in a heartbeat, and I take darn good care of my home. I'm going to prevent anything that happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the trick, is to sell the insurance company that, they're missing the boat, right?
Right.
They're, insurance companies, basically, they try to be competitive. They charge a certain amount, right? They're competitive at other companies. Most people, when they're buying homes, they're not educated enough to know, not like their lack of education, but just like the awareness about owning a home and how to insure your home. Because the brokers don't do a great job explaining to people, hey, you might want more coverage here because as something happens, $10,000 to handle it is likely not going to be enough. They don't. They just cut limits down, try to give the cheapest price to people, because in people's minds, that's what they think they need. And they think that all coverage is the same, so might as well get the cheapest one, right? But it's actually far from the truth. Actually, it's cheaper because they're cutting stuff out of it. And so you're not really getting good coverages. If, let's just say, the average home is like $1,000 a year to insure, I believe, that's probably pretty accurate. To add another $1,000 and double it for mold as a mold rider, to give people that coverage, I think would be very profitable for the insurance company. And yes, I totally agree. I know I would pay it. I know most people that own homes that are aware of the effects of mold would pay it, because at the end of the day, you'd rather have it when you need it than need it and not have it, right? So I think at the end of the day, because there has to be a win-win. If there's no win-win, it doesn't work. And I recognize that. I understand the costs associated with it. It's one of the largest costs for insurance companies, which is why they cut it. But instead of, cutting things down and hurting people in the process just to make a profit, why don't we actually figure out a way to create a win-win for everybody? And I'm right there with you. I agree that that's the solution to it. It's just, how do we sell this to insurance companies? How do we market this to people to educate them better, to get better coverage? If you're listening to this right now, call your broker, figure out what mold coverage you have, and up it to whatever the maximum they'll give you, because that is so valuable, because most people just are so well undercovered with mold.
Right. Yeah, 110%. I totally agree. Yeah.
So we had some great conversations about kind of the present and the future, a little bit of the past as well. And I would love for people to just get really good information on what to do with themselves. Hopefully for those listening, you got really excited about kind of the future that many of us out there are trying to create. And so now we're looking at, I have mold, maybe I'm fixing it, or I plan to fix it. Actually, let's take a step back. If I have mold, what is the likelihood that treatments are going to work while I stay in this moldy home? Is this something that really needs to be addressed?
Great question. And, this is going to be the thing that takes the air out of everyone's sails, but you can not get better while still exposed. And I tell people that you're not looking for perfection. You're looking for different and better. You could be living in a home that has tons of stachy, that's super toxic, but you can move into your mom's home, which might have a lower count of some type of more benign form of penicillium that might make your eyes a little itchy and give you a histamine reaction, but it's not dumping neurological toxins into your body. So, I tell people sometimes it can just be enough to get out of a space for 2 weeks. For some people, it's so quick. It's like 6 days and they see a difference. And if you return home and your symptoms either start up within anywhere from an hour to 2 days after arrival home, you need to really start thinking about what could be going on in the home,
Yeah, no, it's really important too. And to tie that perspective again on the remediation side is, we've been led to believe that if we don't do everything to our home, if we don't make this medically clean, that we're not going to be able to heal. And I just from my perspective, without talking about the clinical stuff, but when people are working with budgets and they're looking at what are the biggest problem areas and they're tackling those areas, and some of the smaller stuff, yes, that's elevated, right? It's elevated. It's not saying that you can't improve it, but we're talking about let's get rid of the areas creating the most contamination, the most particles and toxins that are getting inside the body. Let's limit those, right? And so we don't need to build bubbles around our houses and chase perfection, because it's going to cost a lot of money chasing perfection. We just need to improve what we have, and taking steps to improve what we have is going to be very vital. And working with someone who can look at that and really understand what is the biggest problems of the home, I think is vital. So for those listening, yes, you want to deal with it, but there's a way to deal with it. It's easy to get overwhelmed. Just know that you can take steps to fix things without, thinking that there's nothing you can do. So,
and it doesn't have to happen all at once, right? Like, for ideally, remediations should happen all at once because of time and exposure and all these things. But if you're someone who's like, there's one problem room in the house and you're sitting in a position where you don't have the finances, like, it is like, consider taping off that room with 6 mil plastic and putting a box fan in the window and creating a bit of negative pressure in that room while you figure out what you can do in that situation. Like, that's not maybe the best thing from building mechanics. I'm sure people have feedback, but anything that you can do to put a little bit of Band-Aid along the way before you ultimately can address the whole problem, like, it's a step in the right direction, and that shouldn't be poo-pooed.
Yeah.
It's something. And here's the other thing that I wanted to drive home that you mentioned, where the idea of perfection and living in a bubble, that puts you into a heightened fight or flight state. That puts you into that panic, nervous system arousal state, and that can hold you in your immune system activation and illness pattern. So even if you've done a really thorough remediation and you're working on healing, but you're going around and you're panicking about every single little thing in the house because it's not perfect, that's going to be something that's really going to be an impediment on recovery. So, it's like that twofold where, sure, perfection, A, isn't possible, but B, seeking perfection can keep you sicker longer.
Yeah. No, it's really important too. Like there's a lot of strain. There's a lot of psychological effects that happen. And with all that, you add all the complexities and the overwhelm, it just pushes people over the edge. And, it's important that people know, like, there are things that you can do to take steps regardless of, whatever your situation is. And you want to do those things, don't feel that, taking a step forward is hopeless. And I think that's really important because, a lot of people go on these, websites and social media, and it's all doom and gloom. And, you hear stories of people that, had to burn their house down and live in a tent to get better. And it's like, the person made that choice and maybe they did get better. Right. But that doesn't mean that that has to be that way for everyone. And so it's really important that, people kind of do what they can, do what's inside their means, take steps forward and get that action. So thank you for chiming in and answering that question for me. Now, I am taking steps forward. I'm reducing the exposure. I know this has been problematic. This can range, obviously, right? Some people can get better in 6 days, as you said. Some people could take 2 years, right? So how do I determine, me being the patient at this point, how do I determine what my case is going to be, what my plan needs to be going forward, and how do I get my health back?
Sure. So I will say working with someone who's mold literate is a really great place to start. It doesn't have to be me. It can be any of the many wonderful physicians or practitioners in our community. There's more than one person who helps out there. But really trying to wrap your head around your symptoms. One of the first things that is so helpful for a physician who's really thinking about this is to document all your symptoms. And then how I organize them when I'm working with a client, and I say, does this look more allergy? Does this look more toxic Does this look more like inflammation centered, or, does this look more like an infection? And depending on, where the symptoms fall in those clusters, I'm going to like maybe do a workup for allergy and toxin, or, it's looking a lot like a fungal infection or colonization, and there's that toxic component. I'm going to work up both. And so getting really clear on your symptoms can really set the groundwork for a physician to actually figure out which case the direction is going. Which direction the case is going. And then depending on what they see, then they can attest you appropriately. I think and I understand why physicians do it. I think one of the most frustrating things that I see, and I understand the desire to do it, but when folks just throw everything and every single bit of testing at the thing in front of them, we're going to do the allergy, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And my biggest concern is, do you know what clinical question you're asking? Does that test fit the picture for you? If so, what is that test going to tell you when it comes back abnormal? If it comes back abnormal and you don't know what it's telling you, then you just wasted folks' money. Maybe someone can uncover what that little piece of data means later on, but in the meantime, there's not an actionable step from it because you're having trouble understanding what it means. And I see a lot of that happen with some of the CIRS protocol testing. I'll have people come in and let's say, oh, my TGF beta is high and I have the HLA, and that's it. That's all that they have or they know about the situation. And meanwhile, like those 4 circles I mentioned, the infection, the allergy, the inflammation, and the toxins, that's only one of those 4 circles. And so, I spend a lot of time with my clients getting really clear about their picture, and then moving forward to testing appropriately. Now, given that, what I will say, if I expect there to be a toxic component, I always go after toxins first. And that's because if there's an infection and we go after toxins in the environment, but the toxins still stay, then I wonder if the toxins are coming from the infection. If there's toxins in the environment, but there's also other molds in the environment and they go in and remediate, then you can potentially clear out the allergy by addressing the environment and clear out the toxins. Similarly, if someone has kind of that low-level case of inflammation, which is usually driven by that toxic exposure, going out and pulling out the toxins by cleaning up the environment first can sometimes shake that CIRS picture, shake it clean so quick, to the point that if someone is appropriately detoxed in my practice, I usually find only a handful of people actually come back with the core CIRS labs elevated. When I was originally trained to do the whole CIRS protocol, it was the don't do mycotoxin testing. When they walk in the door, the first thing that you're going to want to do is draw all of these labs. And I had people who were sick from mold and the labs looked normal. I had people who, were sick from exposure and their CIRS labs looked abnormal. And then I detoxed them for the month that protocol suggests, and they weren't getting better because they needed longer than that, or they needed detox prep work, or you needed to address mast cell activation before the detox prep, before the detox, or you needed to heal the gut and the mast cell. Like, there's so many pieces that come together before that. So like I said, when I've moved through this, I've really come to understand the workflow, I guess, depending on the person that's sitting in front of me, because I might do mast cells first with you, and then we don't need to do too much toxin prep, and then we're good to go with you. And meanwhile, there are people who, before we can even start to detox them, we're like 6 months into it, so yeah, that's a really long-winded answer, and I apologize. I'm so sorry for it, but it's, I just wish I could tell people, if you're exposed, go on glutathione and a binder. But I've seen so many people get sick from that when they're still exposed. And, unfortunately, there's just not one blanket safe thing that I can suggest. Maybe increase fiber and water consumption, safely, if your kidneys are operating correctly. Like there's so many cautionary things that have to be said. But if you're in mold exposure, trying to get out for a period of time, increasing your fiber and eating healthier and seeing what kind of traction you get with that. And if you get great traction, then great. You don't need a mold literate physician. You did it on your own. But above and beyond that, it might be best to work with someone who's really done the work and has hit a lot of roadblocks. I've hit many roadblocks, and that's the only reason why I know what I know. You got to be honest about that.
I think what you said is very valuable too. And I think it really paints that picture that medicine is so individualized. We've been kind of programmed that, you have this, you just take this pill, or you have that, you have to take that pill. And I think, functional medicine, integrative medicine, naturopathic medicine is really more in tune with getting to the root cause, right? Like if I have a magnesium deficiency, why do I have a magnesium deficiency, right? And what are all the symptoms that I'm experiencing from that magnesium deficiency? The old way of medicine is like, just treat those symptoms so you don't feel them, right? But it doesn't actually handle the underlying cause. And I think the new way of medicine is really realizing that, look, every single person has a different genetic makeup. Everybody's different. They're going to experience different symptoms from different things. They have different imbalances going on. There's different other underlying conditions people are experiencing. And the only way to help people is to know all of that and know how to handle and which order to handle it, right? And you said sequencing in the workflow is so important, because what happens if you detox before you handle the mast cell activation syndrome, right? Odds are they're not going to feel well, and they're not going to get better as quickly as they could if you did it in the proper sequence. And for so many doctors out there, even the doctors that are supposedly mold literate, it's just like everyone just pushing this, here's the binders, here's the glutathione, here's all these supplements. And maybe that works for some, but you're seeing, you're going to hit a lot of roadblocks, I would imagine, with the people that need other things in on top of maybe potentially some of these mold programs. So I love that, the fact that you highlighted that, because I think it's really important for people to get better.
Yeah. And I tell people when they work with me, it's not that I have a magic pill or a magic anything. It's like having two different carpenters with the same hammer and the same tools, but they build a different structure. I'm all about timing, watching, waiting, interventions. How did that go? Okay, let's get feedback from this. Let's integrate this. Let's go slow. Let's take our time. And I've learned so much in that process, and I'm humbled and honored by it. And then, I've seen so many people get better, and I don't poo-poo people who do binders and glutathione, because you do the best you can with what you know until you know better. When you know better, you do better. And so I don't shame people for that. I think it's great that so many people want to help people in mold illness. And it's okay when you hit a roadblock. It's okay to refer to a physician who maybe has a bit more experience and can help the client move a little bit forward. Like there are times where I refer to other physicians because I go, like this is also bigger than the tools in my bag. So, there are a lot of different approaches, and it's really, like you said, finding the approach that's best for the person, finding the protocol that is the one that matches who the person is in front of you.
That's awesome. Really, really appreciate all of that. And before we go today, I wanted to ask you about bacteria, and particularly actinomycetes. So I have my opinions on actinomycetes, particularly with like what you can identify in the home. And, it's kind of like the ERMI of bacteria, if you will. But the problem with the technology in its current state is you don't know where the sources are coming from. You have to kind of guess. Some of them probably will come from the same water damage areas that the mold is also growing in, but can also have it in the plumbing systems, PVC plumbing systems, HVAC drain lines, condensate drain lines. You can have them in your shower drains, your sink drains, as well as, of course, humans shed actinomycetes. The other big thing I've seen is animals. If people have pets that run in and out, that roll around in the mud and the soil where actinomycetes is abundant, all of that can influence the results in the home. And so without being able to really detect where the sources are coming from, it makes it very challenging to do anything with that data. And I'm curious to see, I just haven't heard this really much yet, but how are people dealing with actinomycetes from the clinical side?
I think that is still a big ball of wax that we're working on unraveling and looking at. I'll be the first to say that I am not the expert in actinos, and there are times where a home has been remediated and maybe mold isn't as prevalent of an issue, that I've wondered if the actino has been something that has been conveniently removed with the process too. And the human shedding, animal shedding, the PVC, the drainage lines, like, yes to all of that. And I just wish I had more data, and I know that there are a few labs out there that do testing for it. And I think what would be really profound is if we could get some of those labs to share their data with ISEAI, or come on here and speak with you about maybe what they're seeing and what the patterning looks like. But I think in the indoor built environment, there's a lot of good work that's being done around actinos, but there's still a lot of questions that remain, and a thorough approach to the investigation that really remains to be seen. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that there's someone out there doing the good work and will share their data with us at some point soon.
Yeah. No, it's good. I think it's still at its infancy of, how prevalent it is, how much it matters to the equation, learning more about that. But yeah, good to ask you, figure if you knew anything about it, for the fine folks because I get calls a lot more now that I think actino might be the problem. I don't think mold's the problem, but we're also finding mold in the places where they think actino is the problem. So maybe it's that perfect storm, and steps need to be taken to reduce everything that you're potentially exposed to, right? But still an evolving science, and I'm looking forward to seeing how things continue to develop in the future. For those listening, you're worried about actino, basically, cleaning your drain lines, cleaning the home, just like you would after a mold remediation, you're going to remove all these particles as well. And as far as, pets, try to keep your pets clean when they come in and out, which is more of a challenge and an easy thing to say than to actually do. But these are some of the things that we're seeing from the home perspective of how actino, can enter the home in elevated levels. So before we go here today, I would love for you to offer like one piece of advice. And I know this is so difficult because there's so much good advice to give, but if you can offer like one thing that you wanted someone to take away, what would that be?
Yeah. Find your ally in all of this. Your ally is going to be someone who believes you, supports you, doesn't gaslight you, who's going to be there to listen to you, help hold your hand, who's going to come to office appointments and scribe for you, or who's going to, anyone who's going to be there and support is going to be so important for you. And it's not just the day-to-day support, but it's also the emotional support. When you go through the trauma of this illness, the financial trauma, the physical illness trauma where you can't do things that you had before, the social isolation trauma, like the inability to work, the list goes on and on. But if you have someone there that you can connect with and be vulnerable with, but also share joy with, that is going to take you so far, because those are the people that's going to help you. Those are going to be the people who help to center your nervous system and keep you calm and get you out of that fight or flight and get you into that, rest, digest, or get you into that proper vagal tone, get you into that balanced limbic system. So that way, when you do all this great work of treatment, that it does stick. So find your ally and allow them to help you to center and ground and work to find, joy, and don't panic. Like, it's really comes back to the ally is going to be the person to really keep you moving through it.
Well said. We need more allies, less frenemies these days, right? So well said. Thank you very much. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm so glad that we had the pleasure of having you on today. You were a wealth of information as always, and looking forward to having you on again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And people who are looking out for me, they can find me at any of the social media, the main ones with the handle Life After Mold. And if you head over to my website, also lifeaftermold.com, they can get a hold of my Mold Prevention 101 e-booklet, which helps you keep an eye on some maybe problematic areas in the home that could turn out to be an issue. So that's free for download when you sign up for the newsletter. So of course, thank you so much for having me here. It's been a long time coming. I appreciate your patience with all the rescheduling. So thank you so much, Mike.
Life is busy, life happens, and totally understood. And just so glad we're able to get this done and get the good information to people's hands. And thank you again, as always. And yes, please go follow Lauren on social media. She's always posting really funny and good information out there. And check out our website as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.